Hey Bethel Youth, this is Pastor Pete back with you. And this is our first installment of the Sunday Shorts. So again, what are Sunday Shorts? Well, basically they're just short videos that are some sort of teaching, right? So this particular series that we're going to start today is called Heroes of the Faith. But in the future, it could be anything. It could be what the Bible says about fear, what the Bible says about worry. And I'm going to be doing them mostly, but I would love to hear from you guys too. I would love if someone would be willing to do a Sunday short as well. But essentially, they're intended to kind of be a replacement for our Sunday morning Sunday schools that we normally would have. But instead of doing a Zoom call, I thought it'd be good to do a video that you can watch anytime that you want. Okay, let's get into it. So Heroes of the Faith. What is this series about? Basically, this is going to be a series that investigates the lives of Christians throughout time who have played a role in spreading the gospel and being a part of the life of the church. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in the details of everyone's life, because the reality is these are pretty significant people in Christian history, and we could spend days and days talking about them. But what I want to do is focus on the big picture. And even though these are significant people, I want to show you that the reality is that what made them significant is what God did through them. And it's not that they themselves were superhuman or were the superheroes. I want to make their lives relatable. Right? So why? Why are we doing this? Well, I think it's easy to just kind of exclude or not think about people who aren't in the Bible, right? People who lived after the time of Jesus, but still have had a huge impact on our faith and on the church. I think the reality is that we want to focus on the Bible purely because of actually another person we're going to talk about in the future, which is Martin Luther, right? And Luther came up with these ideas, one of which being sola scriptura. And it's just a fancy way, it's a Latin phrase for the Bible alone. And the idea is that as Christians, all we need is the Bible. We don't need any sort of other philosophy or other book to look to live out our Christian faith. And I would totally agree with that. But I would also totally agree that it's helpful to look at people who also believed what Luther did and lived it out in pretty incredible ways. I think it can be a helpful thing to look at. It can be encouraging. So I want to take a look at what Hebrews chapter 12 has to say about this, because I think it also it says something about looking at people in the past. It says this, Hebrews 12 verses 1 through 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. See, so the author of Hebrews is talking about being surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, right? These people who have gone before us, who have ran the race well, and how we can look to them, right, and be encouraged by them. We can lay aside sin because of them, right, because of their example. But I don't want us to get caught up in those people so much as I want to get caught up in what he says at the end, right? He says, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. Ultimately, these people's lives are significant because they counted Jesus as significant, not the other way around, right? So I think that's why it's cool. We can look at these people, we can learn from them, be encouraged by them, and ultimately be looking to Jesus. So, for our first hero, I'm going to introduce you to a man named James Hudson Taylor. I'm going to call him Hudson Taylor for the rest of it, right? So who is he? Well, Hudson Taylor was born in England in 1832 in a small town called Barnsley. I looked it up, I Googled it, I always got to know. Barnsley, right now, today, is about the size of Rochester, Minnesota. So it's certainly bigger than Fairmont, but it's really not a huge town. And James Hudson Taylor was a normal guy, right? There actually wasn't anything that significant about him. His dad's name was James Taylor, and he was a pastor, right, in the Methodist church. And his mom's name was Amelia, and she was a chemist. But even though he had grown up in a Christian family, Hudson denied his faith growing up. He ran away from it. He didn't really want any part of it. But when he was 17, he found a Bible tract, and he became a Christian. Okay, so that's who he is. So what did he do? Well, the crazy thing is that same year when he was 17, he felt God calling him to be a missionary in China. And this is significant because not a lot of Christian missionaries were going to China at this time. There were missionaries kind of on the coast of China, but there was no one else inland than that. Right? So at 17, he felt this calling to go be a missionary in China. And so for the next 4 years, between ages 17 and 21, Hudson prepared. Right? So he studied Chinese culture and Chinese language. Right? And he also studied medicine in order to help people physically when he was there. So Hudson spent 7 years traveling around China, preaching and putting his medical knowledge to use by helping people. And there's something that's cool about Hudson Taylor that made him different than other missionaries in China at the time. Right? And that's the fact that he adopted Chinese culture and language in ways that no one else really had at the time. So he dressed in a traditional Chinese way. He ate Chinese food. And he even cut his hair like a traditional Chinese man would. Right? So he had his hair shaved except for kind of this part on the back, which had a lot of long hair, and then he wore it in a ponytail. Right? I think that's kind of crazy. Very, very cool, because not a lot of people were doing it at the time. But Hudson thought it was really significant and important that as he was going to these people, that they maintain their culture, they maintain their language, but in that, he introduced them to the gospel of Jesus. I think that's a pretty cool thing. But life for Hudson was hard. In the 7 years, there was a lot of hardships. And at the end of those 7 years, he got really sick. So sick that he almost died. And he had to go back to England. And I think Hudson thought, okay, I'm never going to go back. Right? This is done. This was my time. As he went back to England, God kept pursuing him. That's the cool thing, y'all. I think God continues to pursue us, regardless of where we are in life. Even if we don't really know what we think about Jesus, even if we don't really feel that excited about Christianity, God keeps pursuing us. He keeps pursuing our hearts. I know that's true. So after a few years at home, God put China on Hudson's heart once again. And so he actually started his own missionary organization and called it the China Inland Mission, or CIM. Because again, like I said earlier, there was Christian missionaries on the coast of China, in cities like Shanghai, but there weren't Christian missionaries farther in to the rest of China at this time. And God worked very powerfully through the China Inland Mission. Here's some things I found about it. Found that by the time that Hudson died in 1905, the China Inland Mission had 825 missionaries living in all 18 provinces of China. They had more than 300 workstations, more than 500 local Chinese helpers, and 25,000 people who had committed their lives to Jesus, right, converted to Christianity. That's incredible. Think about that. When he was a young man, right, he went to China, gets sick, comes back. Okay, he goes to China again, And just through that act, all of these people come to know Jesus. I think that's pretty incredible. But life still wasn't easy for Hudson, even through this time. He ended up getting married, but his wife passed away not long after they got married. It was about 15 years, I believe, after they got married that she passed away. There was also a number of missionaries who came to work with the China Inland Mission who ended up dying of various diseases. It was a hard time. And Hudson knew what it meant to suffer and knew what it meant to go through difficult times. But he persevered. So why does this matter? Why does Hudson Taylor's life matter? Well, I think there's a few things. Number one, Hudson Taylor was a normal person. And God used him to do amazing things. So you don't have to be born into the right family. You don't have to be born at the right time or the right place. You don't have to be given the things that the world deems as important in order for God to use you. In fact, I think God tends to use people who the world sees as weak, who the world sees as powerless. I think those are a lot of times the people that God uses because it shows their dependency on Him. It shows God's power through their lives. So he's a normal person like you, right? And God used him to do amazing things. Number two, Hudson loved the people of China that he worked with, right? He just had a passion in his heart for the Chinese people, right? And he gave up his life in England. He gave up his opportunities. He gave up security to go be with these people and spend his life with them. And it makes me ask the question, do we love people like that? Do we look at our friends and do we find them worth spending all that time with, worth developing relationships with? Do we find them worth sharing the gospel of Jesus with them, telling them about how Jesus came, he lived, and he died for us so that we could have a relationship with God? Do we love them that much to do that, to take that risk? Hudson thought it was worth it. So do we love people like that? Number three, Hudson Taylor gave up money, he gave up comfort, and he gave up security for Jesus. And this brings me to the title of this little teaching, which is called How Far is Too Far? Right? I think it's easy to give up Sunday mornings, right, to go to church. It's easy to give up Wednesday nights to go to youth group. But Hudson Taylor gave up his life. He ended up spending 56 years in China, ended up dying in China because of old age, right? He gave up all of these things for the sake of Jesus. And I think that should make us think, how far is too far for us? So I want to leave you with a quote by Hudson Taylor. I think it's really powerful. He says, God isn't looking for people of great faith, but for individuals ready to follow him. I think that's amazing. And I think that should encourage our hearts, right? Again, that we don't need to be these incredible people with superhuman skills. God's going to equip us. God's going to equip us when he calls us to do something. We just need to be ready to follow him. Well, thank you, Bethel Youth, for tuning in, for listening. I hope something from today was encouraging. I hope it was uplifting. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.